Some say the land remembers what we've forgotten. It holds our secrets in its soil, our promises in its dust. In the heart of Oak Ridge Valley, a drought-ravaged paradise where once proud family farms wither under relentless sun, the battle lines have been drawn in silence. They come with briefcases instead of guns now, corporate vultures circling dying dreams, offering salvation with one hand while concealing destruction in the other. Water more precious than gold flows where money dictates, not where generations of calloused hands have earned the right to harvest. When the fence between two properties falls, it's more than wood and wire that hangs in the balance. It's trust, it's legacy, it's the invisible boundary between surrender and defiance, a single act of kindness in a world that's forgotten its value, a helping hand extended when all others have withdrawn. Neither knows that this moment, this broken fence on this forgotten boundary, will ignite a war for the soul of a valley that both have loved in different ways, for very different reasons. The letter arrived on Robert Callahan's weathered kitchen table, its official seal gleaming in the morning light. Final notice of foreclosure, it read in bold, unforgiving letters. His calloused hands trembled slightly as he folded it and slid it into his shirt pocket. $75,000. The number might as well have been 75 million for all the chance he had of paying it. Bob, as everyone in Oak Ridge Valley called him, ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair and stared out the kitchen window at the fields that had been in his family for 3 generations. The drought had turned what should have been lush farmland into a patchwork of dusty browns and faded yellows. 3 years without adequate rainfall had brought his once thriving farm to its knees. At 55, the former Army Ranger looked older than his years. Decades of working from sunrise to sunset had carved deep lines into his tanned face. His body, once powerful and imposing, now carried the slight stoop of a man who had spent too many hours bent over crops and machinery. The distant sound of a loud explosion shattered the morning quiet. Bob's military instincts kicked in immediately. He was on his feet and running toward the noise before his coffee mug stopped rocking on the table. The sound had come from the direction of the old Sullivan place, the abandoned orchard bordering his eastern property line. As he crested the hill separating the properties, he saw smoke rising from the roadside. A luxury SUV had veered off the road and slammed into a massive oak tree near the dilapidated Sullivan fence line. The front end was crumpled, steam hissing from the radiator. Worse, flames were beginning to lick at the undercarriage. "Hey, anyone in there?" Bob shouted, sprinting toward the vehicle. A woman's voice answered, tight with pain. "I'm stuck. The door won't open." Owner, Bob reached the driver's side and yanked on the handle. The door was jammed from the impact. Through the window, he could see a woman with auburn hair, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. She was pushing against the door with one shoulder, her other arm clutching a leather portfolio to her chest. "Stand back from the door," Bob ordered. He picked up a fist-sized rock from the roadside and smashed it against the driver's window. The safety glass spiderwebbed but held. 2 more blows shattered it enough for him to clear an opening with his elbow. "Give me your hand," he called, reaching through the broken window. The woman pushed the portfolio through first. "Please, take this. It's important." Bob grabbed the portfolio and tossed it safely away from the vehicle. "Now you," he insisted, extending his hand again. She reached for him, wincing as she moved. Bob gripped her arm firmly and helped guide her through the window. Just as her feet touched the ground, a whoosh of flames erupted from beneath the vehicle. "My bags," she started to say, looking back at the passenger seat. "No time." Bob pulled her away from the SUV, half carrying her as they retreated to a safe distance. Moments later, the flames reached the gas tank, and the vehicle exploded with a deafening boom, sending a fireball into the morning sky. They watched in stunned silence as the SUV was engulfed in flames. "That was close," Bob said finally. "Are you hurt badly?" "I don't think so," the woman replied, pressing a hand to her bleeding forehead. "Just a cut and some bruises. Thank you for pulling me out." "What happened?" Bob asked, retrieving her portfolio from where he'd tossed it. The woman's green eyes hardened. Someone ran me off the road. A black pickup with tinted windows. They came up behind me fast, then pulled alongside and swerved into my lane. Bob frowned. That doesn't sound like an accident. It wasn't, she said with certainty. They were trying to force me off the road, and they succeeded. She extended her hand. I'm Victoria Montgomery. Most people call me Tori. Robert Callahan. Everyone calls me Bob. He shook her hand, noticing her firm grip. You're not from around here. No, she admitted. I'm here to look at the Sullivan property. I'm considering purchasing it. Bob's eyebrows rose. That old place has been abandoned for years. Orchard's a mess. Buildings are falling apart. I see potential where others see ruin. Mr. Callahan. She swayed slightly, putting a hand to her temple. You need to sit down, Bob said, concern evident in his voice. My house isn't far. Let's get you cleaned up, and I can call someone about your car. Thank you, Tori said, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine gratitude. As they walked toward Bob's farmhouse, he couldn't help wondering why anyone would be interested in the derelict Sullivan orchard, or why someone would try to run a potential buyer off the road. 20 minutes later, Tori sat at Bob's kitchen table, a cup of hot tea in front of her and a bandage on her forehead. She had refused his suggestion to call an ambulance, insisting it was just a minor cut. I appreciate the first aid, she said, watching as Bob rinsed blood from a washcloth in the sink. And the rescue? Army Rangers, Bob explained simply. You learn a thing or two about emergency situations. Tori nodded, her eyes taking in the modest farmhouse. The furniture was old but well-maintained, the floors worn but clean. On the walls hung faded photographs of 3 generations of Callahans standing proudly in the same fields. Bob now worked alone. Your family has farmed here a long time, she observed. Since 1956, Bob confirmed, hanging the washcloth to dry. My grandfather bought this place when he came back from Korea, built it up from nothing. He glanced out the window toward his fields. He'd be heartbroken to see it now. The drought's been hard on everyone in the valley, Tori said quietly. Bob gave her a sharp look. You've done your research. I always do. She took a sip of tea. The Sullivan place borders your property, correct? That's right. Old man Sullivan passed away 5 years ago. His children tried to sell, but no takers. Banks won't loan money for orchards in a drought-stricken area, which is precisely why it's the perfect time to buy, if you have the resources and patience, Tori replied. She set down her cup. I should check on the property fence. I noticed it was in disrepair when I was driving by. That fence has been falling down for years, Bob said, and you're in no condition to be inspecting property lines after what just happened. Nevertheless, I need to see it. Tori stood, wincing slightly. Would you be willing to show me I'd value a neighbor's perspective? Bob hesitated. The foreclosure notice in his pocket demanded his attention. He had work waiting repairs on the irrigation system, a delivery to make to the farmer's market, paperwork for the bank. But there was something about this determined woman that intrigued him. I suppose I could spare an hour, he conceded. As they walked toward the Sullivan property, Bob noticed that despite her city clothes and recent accident, Tori moved with purpose across the uneven ground. She wore practical boots under her designer jeans, and her eyes constantly scanned the landscape, taking in details a casual observer might miss. When they reached the property line, Bob let out a low whistle. The fence hadn't just deteriorated, it had been deliberately damaged. Several posts had been knocked over, and the wire fencing was cut in multiple places. This isn't natural wear and tear, he said, crouching to examine a clean cut in the wire. Someone took wire cutters to this, and recently, Tori's expression darkened. First, someone tries to run me off the road, and now this. Someone doesn't want me looking at this property. Question is, who? Bob straightened, surveying the damage. And why? I have my suspicions, Tori murmured. Then more decisively, I need to repair this fence today. Can you recommend someone local who might help? Bob scratched his stubbled chin. Most folks around here are busy with their own places, and with the drought, extra hands are hard to come by. He sighed, making a decision his rational mind questioned. I could help you myself. I've built more fences than I care to remember. Tori's green eyes widened in surprise. You would do that after just meeting me. Don't you have your own work to attend to? I do, Bob admitted. But my father always said Callahans help their neighbors, even the temporary ones. Besides, he added with a small smile, it'll feel good to fix something that can actually be fixed. Something in his tone must have resonated with her, because Tori's professional facade softened. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. I accept your help gratefully. Bob, he corrected, if we're going to rebuild a fence together, we might as well be on a first-name basis. Bob, she agreed, and please call me Tori. I'll get my tools from the barn, he said. Meanwhile, you should probably change if you have other clothes. Fence building is dirty work. Tori glanced down at her blood-stained blouse and nodded. I have work clothes in my rental car, parked in town. Would you mind if I borrowed your phone to call for a ride? An hour later, they were both hard at work on the fence. Tori had changed into jeans, work boots, and a flannel shirt that looked brand new, but was surprisingly practical. Bob provided gloves for both of them, and they set about clearing the damaged sections. As they worked, Bob found himself impressed by Tori's willingness to tackle the physical labor. Though it was clear she wasn't accustomed to such work, she followed his instructions carefully and didn't shy away from the difficult tasks. You're a quick study, he commented as she helped hold a post steady while he tamped the soil around its base. I believe in learning by doing, she replied, wiping sweat from her brow with her forearm. You can read about something all you want, but there's no substitute for hands-on experience. Sounds like something my father would say. Bob moved to the next post. So what brings a city woman like you out here, looking at a rundown orchard? Tori carefully measured the distance between posts before answering. I see opportunity where others see decline. This valley has exceptional soil, good water rights drought notwithstanding, and a climate perfect for certain crops. You sound like you know something about farming, Bob observed. I've been around it my whole life, in one form or another. Before Bob could ask more, the sound of an approaching vehicle caught their attention. A dusty pickup truck was bouncing down the rutted access road toward them. Expecting company, Bob asked, setting down his tools. Tori's expression was wary. No. The truck pulled up beside them, and two men stepped out. Both were large, with the hard look of men accustomed to intimidation. Neither wore any identifying logos, but their manners suggested they weren't there for a friendly visit. Private property, the taller one called out. You folks shouldn't be here. Bob stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Tori. This is the Sullivan property. It's for sale, and Ms. Montgomery here is a potential buyer. Not anymore, it ain't, the second man said with a smirk. Property's been spoken for. You're trespassing. That's not possible, Tori said firmly. I have an appointment with the listing agent tomorrow. The property is still on the market. The first man spat on the ground. Plans change, lady. Best you forget about this place and move on. Bob felt the tension escalating. These men weren't here for a discussion, they were here to intimidate. His ranger training kicked in as he assessed them both strong but overconfident, likely unused to resistance. I think it's time for you gentlemen to leave, Bob said evenly. Ms. Montgomery has every right to be here. The men exchanged glances. Then the taller one took a step forward. And who's going to make us? What happened next occurred so quickly that Tori barely had time to register it. As the man reached out to shove Bob, the farmer sidestepped with surprising agility, caught the man's arm, and used his own momentum to send him sprawling into the dirt. The second man charged forward, but Bob was ready. A precise strike to the solar plexus doubled the man over, gasping for breath. 20 years U.S. Army Rangers, Bob said calmly. I'm only going to say this once. Get back in your truck and leave. Now. The first man scrambled to his feet, fury in his eyes but a new wariness in his posture. You've made a big mistake, old man. You don't know who you're messing with. Neither do you, Bob replied steadily. After a tense moment, the men backed away, climbed into their truck, and drove off, spewing dust and gravel. When they were gone, Tori let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was impressive, Bob shrugged, already turning back to the fence post. Just because I farm doesn't mean I forgot how to handle myself. Clearly, Tori studied him with new appreciation. Who do you think they were? Not local, Bob said confidently. I know most everyone in this valley. My guess hired muscle sent to scare you off. He paused, looking at her directly. The question is, who would want to scare off a potential buyer for an abandoned orchard? And why? Tori held his gaze for a long moment. I think we both know this isn't just about an old orchard. No, Bob agreed. It isn't. This valley is changing. Someone's buying up properties, water rights, putting pressure on farmers who are already struggling. He hesitated, then added, First National Bank is calling in my loan. I received the foreclosure notice this morning. Tori's expression softened with genuine concern. I'm sorry to hear that. How long have they given you? 30 days, as Bob said, resuming his work on the fence with renewed intensity. Might as well be 30 minutes. I don't have $75,000, and no bank is going to refinance with the drought. They worked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. As the sun climbed higher, Bob noticed Tori studying the irrigation ditches that ran along the property line. These are beautifully engineered, she remarked, crouching to examine one. Hand-dug, but with perfect gradients for gravity flow. You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore. Bob was surprised by her observation. Most people wouldn't notice something like that. I'm not most people, Tori replied with a small smile. The soil composition here is remarkable too. Even with the drought, you can see the underlying quality. You know your soil, Bob said, increasingly curious about this woman who fixed fences in designer work boots and could assess irrigation systems at a glance. It's a passion of mine, she admitted, rising and brushing dirt from her hands. Healthy soil is the foundation of everything. By mid-afternoon, they had repaired most of the damaged fence. Bob found himself enjoying the work and the company, despite the circumstances. Tori was intelligent, observant, and had a dry wit that emerged as they became more comfortable with each other. As they finished setting the last post, Bob's curiosity finally got the better of him. So, Tori Montgomery, who are you really? You're not just a casual investor looking at farmland. Tori paused, seeming to consider how much to reveal. I represent interests that believe in sustainable agriculture and preserving family farms, rather than converting them to industrial operations. Noble sentiments, Bob acknowledged, but not exactly common in today's economy. Maybe that's exactly why they're needed, she countered. Before Bob could press further, his cell phone rang. The screen showed Frank Miller, his neighbor to the north and one of his oldest friends in the valley. Frank, Bob answered. What's up? Bob. Frank's voice was tense. You need to know something. Just had a visit from some suit named Blackwood. Says he represents Horizon Agricultural Corporation. They're buying up debt notes all over the valley. Bob's stomach tightened. Including yours. A heavy pause. They made an offer on my place. Bob, cash. Well above market value. Said they're planning something big for the valley? You're not considering it, are you? Bob asked, though he already knew the answer from Frank's tone. Dorothy's medical bills are piling up, and the bank's breathing down my neck. I don't have much choice. Frank sounded defeated. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Guy mentioned your place too. After ending the call, Bob turned to find Tori watching him intently. Bad news, she asked quietly. Horizon Agricultural is buying up the valley, Bob confirmed. My neighbor's selling out. Tori's expression hardened. Horizon, I should have known. You know them. Our paths have crossed, she said grimly. They're one of the largest industrial farming corporations in the country, and they don't care about sustainability, community, or anything except their bottom line. The pieces were starting to fall into place for Bob. And you're here to compete with them for the Sullivan property. Yes, Tori admitted, but there's more to it than that. She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. I should be honest with you, Bob. The accident this morning wasn't random, and those men weren't just random thugs. You think Horizon was behind both. I know they were, Tori said firmly. This isn't the first time they've used intimidation tactics when they've encountered opposition. She glanced at the setting sun. It's getting late. We should finish up here. As they gathered their tools, Bob couldn't shake the feeling that Tori was still holding something back. Whatever her true purpose in Oak Ridge Valley, it was clearly more complex than she was revealing. I owe you for your help today, Tori said as they walked back toward his house. Would you let me buy you dinner? The least I can do for the man who saved my life, and then spend his day fixing my fence. Despite his weariness and the weight of the foreclosure notice in his pocket, Bob found himself nodding. There's a decent place in town. Nothing fancy, but the food's good. Perfect. Tori smiled, and for a moment, the worry lines around her eyes softened. I'll meet you there at 7. As he watched her walk away, Bob wondered what exactly he was getting himself into. But one thing was certain with the foreclosure looming and Horizon circling like vultures. What did he really have to lose? The Oak Ridge Grill was the closest thing the small town had to a fine dining establishment. It was Friday night, and the restaurant was busy with locals unwinding after a week of hard work. Heads turned when Bob entered with Tori, curious about the unfamiliar woman accompanying the well-known farmer. Marge, the owner and hostess for the past 30 years, greeted Bob with the familiarity of a small town where everyone knew everyone else. Bob Callahan, twice in 1 month must be a special occasion. Her eyes moved to Tori with undisguised curiosity. Just helping a potential neighbor get to know the area. Bob explained. Marge, this is Tori Montgomery. She's looking at the old Sullivan place. Marge's eyebrows rose. About time someone took interest in that property. Been vacant too long. She led them to a corner booth. Best table in the house. You two enjoy your evening. After they settled in and ordered drinks, Bob found himself studying Tori in the restaurant's warm lighting. She had changed into a simple but elegant blouse and slacks, her auburn hair framing a face that was both striking and intelligent. The bandage on her forehead was the only reminder of the morning's dangerous encounter. You're causing quite a stir, he commented, nodding toward the other diners, several of whom were casting curious glances their way. Tori smiled. Small towns. Everyone knows everyone's business. And strangers stand out, Bob agreed. Especially beautiful ones dining with old farmers. Tori's eyes crinkled at his compliment. Hardly old. Experienced, I'd say. Their conversation flowed easily as they ordered and began their meal. Bob found himself talking about his farm, his late wife Marie, who had passed from cancer 8 years earlier, and his son who had moved to Seattle to pursue a career in technology. He never took to farming, Bob explained. Can't blame him. It's a hard life, especially these days. Do you regret staying? Tori asked. Bob considered the question seriously. Sometimes I wonder what life might have been like if I'd done something else after the Army. But there's something about working the land that gets in your blood. The connection to something larger than yourself. Something that was here before you and will be here after you're gone. He smiled ruefully. Though at the rate things are going, the Callahan farm may not outlast me. It doesn't have to be that way, Tori said earnestly. Family farms can survive, even thrive, with the right approach. And what approach is that? Before Tori could answer, a man in an expensive suit approached their table. He was tall, with silver-streaked dark hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Ms. Montgomery, he said smoothly. What a pleasant surprise finding you here. Tori's expression cooled noticeably. Mr. Blackwood, I wasn't aware you were in Oak Ridge. Just arrived yesterday. Business brings me to this charming valley. His eyes shifted to Bob. And you must be Robert Callahan. Thomas Blackwood, Horizon Agricultural. He extended his hand. Bob hesitated before shaking it briefly. You've been talking to my neighbor Frank Miller. Among others, Blackwood confirmed. Horizon has significant plans for this region. Plans that could benefit forward-thinking farmers such as yourself. I'm not selling, if that's what you're here to discuss, Bob said firmly. Blackwood smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Everyone says that initially, then circumstances change. He pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it on the table. When you're ready to discuss real solutions to your financial situation, give me a call. After Blackwood departed, a tense silence fell over their table. I apologize for the interruption, Tori said finally. Thomas Blackwood and I have history. Sounds like there's a story there, Bob observed. A long and complicated one, Tori sighed. Blackwood represents everything that's wrong with modern agriculture. Horizon sees land as a commodity, farmers as obstacles, and sustainability as an inconvenient buzzword. And you see things differently, Bob stated rather than asked. Yes, my company, Montgomery Sustainable Farms, has developed an alternative model. We partner with family farmers rather than buying them out. We provide resources, technology, and market access while farmers maintain ownership and control of their land. Bob leaned back, studying her with new understanding. So that's who you really are. Not just a potential buyer, but the CEO of Montgomery Sustainable Farms. Tori didn't deny it. I should have been upfront with you from the beginning. I apologize for that. Why weren't you? Because I wanted to see this place as it really is, she explained. Talk to people without preconceptions. When people know who I am, what I represent, it changes how they interact with me. She met his gaze directly. And I wanted to see who would help a stranger fix a fence without expecting anything in return. Bob absorbed this, not sure whether to feel flattered or manipulated. So fixing the fence was some kind of test. Not initially, Tori admitted. I really did need help with that fence. But how you responded told me a lot about your character. And what did it tell you? That you're the kind of person who helps others even when you're struggling yourself. That you take pride in doing things right, not just quickly. Her expression softened. That's rare, Bob. Rarer than you might think. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of dessert, a homemade apple pie that Marge insisted they try. As they ate, Bob processed what he had learned. Tori Montgomery wasn't just interested in the Sullivan property. She was planning something larger for the valley, something that directly competed with Horizon's ambitions. So what exactly are you proposing for Oak Ridge Valley? He asked finally. Tori set down her fork, her expression serious. Montgomery Sustainable Farms would purchase the Sullivan property outright. We'd restore the orchard using sustainable methods and establish it as a processing and distribution center for local produce. Bob nodded. Following so far, then, Tori continued, we'd offer partnerships to local farmers. Rather than buying their land, we'd provide access to our equipment, our distribution networks, and our expertise in exchange for a commitment to sustainable practices and a share of the proceeds. What kind of share? Bob asked, the practical farmer in him needing specifics. That would depend on the level of involvement, Tori explained. For some, it might simply be access to our markets in exchange for a small percentage. For others, it could include financial support to transition to organic methods, irrigation improvements, or soil restoration, with correspondingly higher percentages. And ownership, who would own the land. The farmers would, Tori said firmly. Always. That's non-negotiable for me. The land stays in the hands of those who work it. It sounded almost too good to be true, which immediately raised Bob's suspicions. And what do you get out of this Montgomery Sustainable Farms is still a business, not a charity. A fair question, Tori acknowledged. We get a reliable supply of high-quality, sustainably grown produce for our markets. We get to expand our model to a new region with ideal growing conditions. And yes, we make a profit, but a reasonable one that doesn't come at the expense of the farmers or the land. Bob took a sip of his coffee, considering her words. And my farm specifically, where would it fit into this vision of yours? Tori met his gaze directly. Your farm would be central to it. Bob, you have the experience, the knowledge of local conditions, and from what I've observed, the integrity to help lead this transition. I'd want you involved not just as a participant, but as a local manager, helping to implement the model and adapt it to this valley's specific needs. The offer was unexpected, and Bob had to admit, appealing. It would mean a steady income, the chance to keep his land, and the opportunity to help shape the future of farming in his community. But it would also mean change, adaptation, and placing trust in this woman he had known for only a day. I need time to think, he said finally. Of course, Tori agreed immediately. This isn't a decision to make lightly, but I should warn you that time is a luxury we may not have much of. Blackwood's presence here means Horizon is moving aggressively. How long before you need an answer? Tori considered the question. The closing on the Sullivan property is scheduled for next week. I'd like to announce our partnership initiative immediately after that. So, 5 days. 5 days to decide the future of his farm, his family's legacy, and potentially the entire valley. It wasn't much time, but it was fair given the circumstances. All right, Bob agreed. I'll give you my answer in 5 days. The next morning, Bob rose before dawn as usual, despite the late night. His conversation with Tori kept replaying in his mind as he went about his chores. Her vision for the valley was compelling, but he'd been farming long enough to know that dreams often crumbled when faced with the harsh realities of weather, markets, and debt. After feeding his small herd of cattle, Bob decided to do some research. He drove into town to the local library, which had better internet access than his spotty connection at the farm. For the next 2 hours, he read everything he could find about Montgomery Sustainable Farms and Victoria Montgomery herself. What he discovered both impressed and reassured him. Tori had built her company from the ground up, starting with a single farm inherited from her father. Over 15 years, she had expanded through a combination of strategic acquisitions and innovative partnerships, always maintaining a commitment to sustainable practices and fair treatment of farmers. There were testimonials from farmers who had partnered with her company, reports of increased yields and profits, environmental awards, and community recognition. But what struck Bob most was the consistency of Tori's message across years of interviews and speeches. Farming could be both profitable and sustainable if done with respect for the land and the people who worked it. As he drove back to his farm, Bob felt the first stirrings of real hope. Perhaps Tori's offer wasn't too good to be true. Perhaps it was exactly what his farm the entire valley needed. His optimism was short-lived. When he pulled into his driveway, he found Thomas Blackwood's sleek black car parked beside his house. The executive was leaning against the hood, looking out of place in his tailored suit amid the working farm. Mr. Callahan, Blackwood greeted him as Bob parked his truck. I hope you don't mind the uninvited visit. Your neighbor, Frank Miller, mentioned you might be available this morning. What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwood? Bob asked, making no effort to hide his wariness. I think the question is what I can do for you. Blackwood straightened, adjusting his tie. Horizon Agricultural is prepared to make you a very generous offer for your property. He handed Bob a sealed envelope. This figure represents the current market value plus a 20% premium. Bob opened the envelope and couldn't help but raise his eyebrows at the number written there. It was indeed generous, far more than his struggling farm was worth in its current state. And what happens to the farm after the sale? Bob asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Blackwood smiled, clearly pleased by the question. It would be incorporated into Horizon's regional operations, We're planning a significant presence in this valley, a modern, efficient agricultural enterprise that will revitalize the local economy. And my role in this enterprise, we'd be delighted to offer you a management position. Blackwood replied smoothly. Your knowledge of local conditions would be invaluable during the transition. After that, you could either continue with the company or take your payout and pursue other opportunities. It was exactly what Bob had expected, a corporate takeover dressed up as an opportunity. The money was tempting, he had to admit, enough to clear his debts and start fresh somewhere else, but it would mean the end of his family's legacy, the absorption of his land into a corporate machine that valued efficiency over sustainability. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Blackwood, Bob said carefully, but I'm not looking to sell at this time. Blackwood's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I understand. It's a big decision, but I should mention that we've already secured agreements with several neighboring properties. The agricultural landscape of this valley is going to change. Mr. Callahan, the only question is whether you'll benefit from that change or be left behind by it. The implied threat was clear, and it stirred a quiet anger in Bob. Which neighbors? He asked, keeping his voice level. Blackwood consulted a list in his leather portfolio. The Peterson place is finalizing paperwork today. The Rodriguez farm signed yesterday, and Frank Miller is considering our offer as we speak. Bob kept his expression neutral, though he was surprised about the Rodriguez family. They had been in the valley even longer than the Callahans. I see, he said simply, and the Sullivan orchard. Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes, annoyance, perhaps, or concern. That situation is still developing, but I'm confident it will resolve favorably for Horizon. They discussed details for another half-hour timelines, contractual obligations, the future of the valley under Horizon's management. Blackwood painted a picture of modern efficiency, high yields, and economic stability. But nowhere in his vision was there room for the values Bob held dear: stewardship of the land, community support, the independence of family farms. When Blackwood finally left, promising to call the next day for Bob's decision, the sun was high overhead. Bob stood on his porch watching the executive's black car raise dust on the rural road, his mind unsettled. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of work as Bob tried to process the competing visions for his farm's future. By evening, he had reached no conclusion, but he knew he needed more information, not just about Montgomery Sustainable Farms, but about Horizon's true intentions for the valley. As darkness fell, Bob made a decision. He called Frank Miller. Frank, it's Bob. Blackwood was here today. He mentioned you were considering their offer. Miller sighed heavily over the line. They're offering good money. Bob, more than I ever thought I'd get for the place. And with Dorothy's cancer treatments, I'm not sure how many more years we can hang on anyway. What about Montgomery's proposal, the partnership model? It's interesting, Miller admitted, but it's also new, unproven in these parts. Horizon is a known quantity. They've got the resources, the track record. Did Blackwood tell you anything about their plans for the valley? What they intend to do with all this land they're buying? There was a pause on the line. Not specifically, just talked about modernization, efficiency, that sort of thing. Why something doesn't add up, Bob said. Why the aggressive push to buy everything at once, and why the intimidation tactics? Intimidation. What are you talking about? Bob briefly explained Tori's accident and the confrontation at the Sullivan property. Jesus, Bob, Miller breathed. You think Horizon was behind that? Tori Ms. Montgomery seems to think so, and I'm inclined to believe her. Bob hesitated, then added, Frank, before you sign anything with Horizon, I'd like you to hear what Montgomery has to say. She's planning something that could let us all keep our farms. I don't know. Bob, Blackwood says they're moving fast, that these offers won't be on the table indefinitely. Just hold off for a few days, or what? That's all I'm asking. After hanging up, Bob sat in the darkness of his kitchen, the house quiet around him. The Callahan farm had weathered many challenges over 3 generations. Economic downturns, Natural disasters? Changing markets? But this felt different. This wasn't a storm to endure, but a crossroads that would determine not just his future, but the character of the entire valley. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at his door. Bob tensed, wondering if Blackwood had returned with more pressure tactics. But when he opened the door, he found Tori standing on his porch, her expression grave. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said. "Not at all," Bob replied, surprised by her visit. "Come in." Tori entered, declining his offer of coffee. "I've just learned something troubling," she said without preamble. "Horizon's plans for this valley are worse than I thought." Bob gestured for her to sit at the kitchen table. "Tell me." "They're not just buying farms for agricultural consolidation," Tori explained, pulling documents from her portfolio. "They're planning to build a dam on the north end of the valley, right where Miller's property sits. They want to divert water from the entire watershed for their operations elsewhere." Bob stared at her in disbelief. "That would essentially turn the valley into a desert." "Exactly. Any farms not directly controlled by Horizon would be left without adequate water. They'd be forced to sell at rock-bottom prices." "How did you learn this?" Bob asked, examining the plans she had spread on the table. "I have sources within the regulatory agencies," Tori said. "Horizon has been quietly securing permits and rights-of-way for months. They've kept it compartmentalized so no one could see the full picture until it was too late." Bob thought of his conversation with Frank Miller. "I need to warn my neighbors." "It may already be too late for some of them," Tori cautioned. "Once they sign Horizon's contracts, there's no going back." Bob stood, pacing the kitchen. "We need proof, something concrete that shows what Horizon is really planning." "I believe such documentation exists," Tori said carefully. "Horizon has a local office in town, where Blackwood is operating from. If we could access their files—" Bob stopped pacing. "Are you suggesting we break in?" "Not break in," Tori clarified. "The office is in the Oak Ridge Business Center. I have a legitimate appointment there tomorrow with a real estate agent whose office is in the same building. If someone were to accompany me, and that someone happened to take a wrong turn—" "That's still illegal," Bob pointed out. "So is what Horizon is doing," Tori countered. "They're using fraudulent practices to acquire land under false pretenses. That's criminal." Bob considered the risks. At 55, he had never imagined himself engaging in corporate espionage, but the stakes were too high to ignore. Not just his farm, but the entire valley, the community he had been part of his entire life, was in danger. "All right," he said finally. "I'm in. What's the plan? 101. The Oak Ridge Business Center was a modest two-story building on the edge of town, housing various professional offices. Bob, dressed in his best shirt and slacks, walked beside Tori toward the entrance, trying to appear as if he belonged there. "Remember the plan," Tori murmured as they entered the lobby. "I'll meet with the real estate agent as scheduled. You'll wait in the reception area for 15 minutes, then follow the directions I gave you to Horizon's office." Bob nodded, feeling oddly calm despite the circumstances. The clarity of purpose reminded him of his ranger days when the mission was clear. Doubt fell away. They parted in the lobby, Tori heading to her appointment while Bob took a seat in a comfortable chair, pretending to read a magazine. 15 minutes later, he rose casually and made his way down the hallway, following Tori's directions. Horizon's temporary office was on the first floor, at the end of a quiet corridor. Bob approached confidently, as if he had every right to be there. The door was labeled simply Horizon Ag, private, without any company logo or further identification. He tried the handle and found it locked, looking both ways to ensure the hallway was empty. Bob pulled out the key card Tori had somehow procured. She hadn't explained how she got it, and he hadn't asked. Some things were better left unknown. The card worked, the lock disengaging with a soft click. Bob slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. The office was small but well appointed, with a desk, filing cabinets, and a conference table. Maps of the valley were pinned to one wall, with properties highlighted in different colors. Bob recognized his own farm, marked in red, along with several others, including the Sullivan orchard. Moving quickly, he began searching through the files on the desk. Most contained information he already knew: financial data on various properties, soil and water assessments, infrastructure evaluations. But in a locked drawer, which he opened using a technique Tori had shown him, he found what they were looking for. The file was labeled Project Watershed and contained detailed plans for the dam, along with environmental impact assessments that had been altered to downplay the devastating effects on the valley. Most damning of all was a memo outlining Horizon's strategy for acquiring properties. Phase 1, secure key water rights properties through direct purchase. Phase 2, initiate water restriction procedures to devalue remaining holdings. Phase 3, acquire devalued properties at minimum cost. Bob's hands shook with anger as he used his phone to photograph each page. This wasn't just business. It was a deliberate plan to destroy the livelihoods of dozens of families. He was so focused on documenting the evidence that he didn't hear the office door open until it was too late. Well, Thomas Blackwood's voice was cold. Robert Callahan, this is an unexpected surprise. Bob straightened, tucking his phone into his pocket. Blackwood? The executive stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. I don't recall us having an appointment this morning, and I'm certain I didn't give you permission to go through my files. I was curious about what you're not telling us, Bob said, seeing no point in denials. About the dam, about how you plan to drain the valley dry? Blackwood's expression hardened. So Ms. Montgomery has been sharing her conspiracy theories with you. I expected better judgment from a man with your background. It's not a conspiracy theory when I'm holding the evidence in my hands, Bob countered, gesturing to the open file. What you're holding is proprietary business information that you've obtained illegally, Blackwood said, his voice dangerously quiet. That's a serious offense, Mr. Callahan, one that could result in significant legal consequences, especially for someone already facing financial ruin. Bob stood his ground. Are you threatening me? Not at all. Simply pointing out the reality of your situation. Blackwood moved toward the desk. Now, I suggest you hand over your phone, and we can discuss how to resolve this unfortunate incident. I don't think so, Bob replied, edging toward the door. I think the county commissioners will be very interested in these plans, as will the State Water Authority and the EPA. Blackwood's false civility dropped away. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Callahan, Horizon has resources you can't imagine. Politicians, judges, regulators, they all answer to us in the end. Maybe, Bob acknowledged, but people around here still believe in right and wrong, and what you're planning is wrong. Such a quaint perspective, Blackwood sneered. Farmers like you are a dying breed, Callahan, clinging to outdated methods and misplaced values while the world moves forward. Horizon is the future of agriculture, efficient, profitable, unstoppable. We'll see about that, Bob said, reaching for the door handle. Blackwood moved with surprising speed for a corporate executive. Grabbing Bob's arm, "You're not leaving with those photos." What happened next was pure instinct. Bob's ranger training took over as he broke Blackwood's grip with a swift movement, then used the man's momentum to pin him against the wall, forearm pressed against his throat. Listen carefully, Bob said, his voice low and controlled. I'm walking out that door with this evidence. If you try to stop me, or if anything happens to me or Ms. Montgomery, these files go directly to every news outlet and regulatory agency in the state. Do we understand each other? Fear flashed in Blackwood's eyes as he nodded, unable to speak with Bob's arm pressing against his windpipe. Bob released him and backed toward the door. You picked the wrong valley to destroy. Blackwood. He exited quickly, walking at a measured pace down the hallway, expecting at any moment to hear alarms or shouts behind him. But he reached the lobby without incident, where Tori was waiting, her meeting apparently concluded. One look at his face told her everything she needed to know. You found it, she said as they walked briskly to her car. And more, Bob confirmed. But Blackwood caught me. He knows we're on to him. Tori's expression was grim as they drove away from the business center. Then we need to move quickly. Once Horizon realizes what we have, they'll do everything in their power to discredit us and push through their plans before we can organize opposition. We need to talk to Frank Miller, Bob said. His property is key to their dam project. If he doesn't sell, it throws a wrench in their entire plan. Tori nodded, accelerating toward the rural roads that led to the Miller farm. And we need to call an emergency meeting of all the valley farmers who haven't sold yet, tonight, if possible. The community center, Bob suggested. I can make the calls. As they drove through the countryside, Bob felt a surge of purpose that had been missing from his life for too long. This wasn't just about saving his own farm anymore. It was about preserving a way of life, a community, and the land itself for future generations. Frank Miller's reaction to the evidence was everything Bob had hoped for. The older farmer's face flushed with anger as he viewed the photos of Horizon's plans. "Those lying bastard," he growled. "Blackwood sat right there at my kitchen table and told me they were going to modernize farming in the valley, create jobs. Never said a word about a dam or diverting our water. They've been lying to everyone," Bob confirmed. "Using the drought and our financial struggles to pick us off one by one. Well, they can forget about buying my place," Miller declared. "Dorothy and I will live in a tent before I sell to those snakes." With Miller firmly on their side, they spent the rest of the afternoon rallying the remaining independent farmers in the valley. By evening, the community center was packed with concerned landowners, all eager to hear what Bob and Tori had discovered. Bob stood at the front of the room, facing his neighbors and friends. These were people he had known his entire life, hard-working men and women who had endured countless challenges to keep their farms alive. He couldn't let them down. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began. "I know many of you have already been approached by Horizon Agricultural with offers to buy your land. Some might even be considering those offers. Before you make any decisions, there's something you need to know." For the next hour, Bob and Tori laid out everything they had discovered about Horizon's true plans for the valley. They showed the photos of the dam project, explained how the water diversion would affect non-Horizon properties, and detailed the company's three-phase strategy to acquire land at deflated prices. "They're not interested in continuing agriculture in this valley," Tori concluded. "They want the water rights to support their operations elsewhere. Any land they can't use will be left to wither." The room erupted in angry voices as farmers absorbed the implications of what they were hearing. "What can we do about it?" called out Elena Rodriguez, whose family had been reconsidering Horizon's offer. "They have all the money, all the lawyers. We fight back," Bob answered simply. "Together. Ms. Montgomery has an alternative vision for this valley, one that keeps ownership in our hands while providing the resources we need to succeed." He gestured for Tori to take over, and she outlined her partnership model in detail. As she spoke, Bob watched his neighbor's expressions shift from skepticism to interest, and finally to cautious hope. "This isn't just about resisting Horizon," Tori emphasized. "It's about creating something better, a cooperative that honors the tradition of family farming while embracing the innovations needed to thrive in today's world." When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Frank Miller stood up. "I've known Bob Callahan my whole life," he said, addressing the room. "If he says this partnership can work, that's good enough for me. I'm in." One by one, other farmers voiced their support until a clear majority had committed to exploring Tori's model rather than selling to Horizon. As the meeting was breaking up, the community center doors burst open and Thomas Blackwood strode in, flanked by two men in suits. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Blackwood said, his voice carrying across the room. "A little community meeting to discuss illegal activities." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the unwelcome arrivals. "You've got some nerve showing up here, Blackwood," Bob said, stepping forward. "I'm not the one breaking into offices and stealing confidential documents." Blackwood replied. He held up a legal document. "This is a cease and desist order, prohibiting Robert Callahan and Victoria Montgomery from disseminating any materials obtained from Horizon Agricultural's offices. Violation will result in immediate legal action. Your intimidation tactics won't work here, Tori said calmly, joining Bob at the front of the room. These people know the truth now. What they know, Blackwood countered, is hearsay from a woman desperate to block a competitor and a farmer facing foreclosure. Hardly reliable sources. He turned to address the assembled farmers directly. Horizon's offers remain open for now, but after tonight, I can't guarantee the same generous terms. Think carefully about risking your family's futures on Ms. Montgomery's promises. With that parting shot, Blackwood and his associates departed, leaving a wake of uncertainty behind them. Don't let him get to you, Bob urged the group. This is exactly what they want to divide us, make us doubt each other. Most nodded in agreement, but Bob could see the seeds of doubt Blackwood had planted beginning to take root in some faces. The battle for Oak Ridge Valley was far from over. After the meeting, Bob and Tori returned to his farmhouse to plan their next steps. They were sitting at his kitchen table, surrounded by maps and documents, when Tori's phone rang. Her expression darkened as she listened to the caller. When she asked, "I see. Thank you for letting me know." She ended the call, her face grim. "What's happened?" Bob asked. "The bank has moved up the Sullivan property auction to tomorrow morning," Tori said. "Apparently, they received a competitive offer that necessitated an immediate decision." "Blackwood," Bob growled. "He's trying to cut you out," Tori nodded. "Without the Sullivan property as our base of operations, implementing the cooperative model becomes much more difficult." Bob studied the tired lines in her face, the determination in her eyes despite the setbacks. "You really believe in this, don't you? It's not just business for you." "No," Tori admitted quietly. "It's personal too." She hesitated, then reached into her portfolio and pulled out an old photograph. "This is my grandmother, Sarah Sullivan." Bob took the photo, stunned to see a young woman standing in front of a familiar farmhouse, the Sullivan place, decades younger. "Your grandmother was a Sullivan." "Yes, Sarah Sullivan was the sister of Jeffrey Sullivan, who owned the orchard you know as the Sullivan place." Tori's eyes met his. "And before that, they jointly owned a larger property that included what is now your farm." Bob stared at her in disbelief. "My farm was part of the Sullivan property," Tori nodded. "My grandmother sold her portion, what became your farm, to your grandfather in 1962 when my grandfather's health required the family to move to California. Jeffrey kept the orchard portion." The pieces clicked into place in Bob's mind. "That's why you're really here, not just for business, but because of your family connection to the valley." "Yes," Tori acknowledged. "I grew up on stories about this place, the quality of the soil, the perfect balance of sun and shade on the hillsides, the community of farmers who helped each other through hard times." She smiled faintly. "When I learned that the Sullivan property was available, I saw it as an opportunity not just to expand my company's operations, but to honor my grandmother's memory by investing in the place she loved." Bob was processing this unexpected revelation when another thought struck him. "Wait, you said your grandmother was Sarah Sullivan. That would make Blackwood—" "My second cousin," Tori confirmed. "Though we've never acknowledged the relationship. Thomas's grandfather and my grandmother were siblings, but they had a falling out decades ago over the Sullivan land. It's a family feud that Thomas has apparently decided to continue into the next generation." Bob shook his head, amazed at how personal this battle had become. "So tomorrow's auction isn't just about business for either of you?" "No," Tori agreed. "It's about family legacy, old grudges, and very different visions for the future of this valley." She looked at him intently. "I need your help, Bob. If I'm going to win that auction, I need someone who knows the property intimately, who can speak to its true value and potential." "You've got it," Bob said without hesitation. "And I think I know something that might help us." He went to a cabinet in the corner of the kitchen and pulled out a dusty box of old documents. After searching through faded papers, he found what he was looking for: a yellowed map of the valley dating back to the 1950s. "My grandfather kept meticulous records," Bob explained, spreading the map on the table. Including this, a survey of the original water systems on both properties. Tori leaned forward, studying the map with growing excitement. This shows an underground aquifer system connecting both properties. Not just an aquifer, Bob said, pointing to markings on the map. A network of hand-dug wells and gravity-fed irrigation channels. My grandfather mentioned them, but they haven't been used in decades. Modern irrigation systems made them obsolete. Or so everyone thought, Tori breathed. But with the drought, having access to a sustainable water source independent of the county system would be a game changer. Bob finished. And according to this map, the main access point is on the Sullivan property. Blackwood can't know about this, Tori said. If he did, Horizon would be even more determined to get the Sullivan place. Then we'd better make sure they don't get it, Bob replied, a new determination in his voice. What time is the auction? 9 a.m. at the county courthouse. Then we'd better get some rest, Bob said, glancing at the clock, which showed it was already past midnight. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. The county courthouse was unusually crowded for a property auction. Word had spread about the competing interests in the Sullivan Orchard, drawing curious locals and a few reporters from the regional paper. Bob and Tori arrived early, finding seats near the front of the room. Thomas Blackwood entered shortly after, accompanied by a team of suits that screamed, "Corporate lawyers!" He nodded curtly in their direction, his confidence evident in his posture. The auction proceeded with formal efficiency. The county clerk described the property, 120 acres of orchard land with water rights, existing structures in poor condition, property taxes current through the previous quarter. The opening bid was set at the minimum $200,000. Tori raised her hand immediately. $200,000, Blackwood countered without hesitation. $250,000, $300,000, Tori responded. The bidding escalated rapidly, far exceeding the property's assessed value. At $750,000, most of the casual observers were wide-eyed at the amounts being thrown around for a neglected orchard. $800,000, Blackwood said, a hint of strain finally showing in his voice. Tori paused, consulting briefly with her financial advisor who had joined them. Bob could see the concern in her eyes. They were approaching the limit of what she had been prepared to spend. $850,000, she countered, her voice steady despite the tension visible in her shoulders. Blackwood smiled thinly. $1 million. A murmur ran through the crowd. No property in Oak Ridge Valley had ever sold for such a sum. Tori conferred again with her advisor, their whispered conversation intense. Finally, she looked up, her expression resolute. $1,100,000, she announced. All eyes turned to Blackwood, who was receiving urgent whispers from one of his lawyers. After a moment, he straightened and addressed the auctioneer. $1,200,000. The auctioneer looked to Tori, who hesitated. Bob could see the calculation in her eyes. Was the property worth going higher? Could her company justify such an investment? Before she could respond, Bob stood up. If I may, he addressed the auctioneer, I'd like to submit information relevant to the true value of this property. The auctioneer frowned. This is irregular. Mr. Callahan, the auction is for bids only. I understand, Bob replied, but there's critical information about the property that affects its value information that should be part of the public record before the sale is finalized. Blackwood was on his feet immediately. This is outrageous. The auction has established procedures that don't include last-minute information from interested parties. The county clerk, who had known Bob his entire life, intervened. What kind of information are you referring to, Mr. Callahan? Bob held up the aged map he and Tori had discovered the night before. Historical documentation of a previously undisclosed water system on the property, an extensive network of wells and irrigation channels that provide access to an aquifer independent of county water rights. This revelation caused a stir in the room. In drought-stricken Oak Ridge Valley, such a water system would indeed significantly increase the property's value. The clerk examined the map with interest. This appears to be an authentic survey from the county archives. If verified, it would certainly constitute material information about the property. This is a delaying tactic, nothing more, Blackwood objected. Montgomery put him up to this to interfere with a fair auction. I assure you, Mr. Blackwood, my only interest is in ensuring that all parties have complete information, Bob replied calmly. As someone whose family has farmed adjacent land for over 60 years, I can personally attest to the existence of this water system. The auctioneer consulted briefly with the clerk and a county attorney, then addressed the room. In light of this new information, we will take a 30-minute recess to verify these claims. The auction will resume afterward. During the recess, Tori pulled Bob aside. That was brilliant, she whispered. But even with the water system, I'm not sure I can justify going much higher. Horizon has deeper pockets. You may not have to, Bob said with a small smile. Blackwood isn't the only one who can play hardball. When the auction resumed, the clerk confirmed that preliminary research supported Bob's claims about the water system. The bidding continued with renewed energy. $1,300,000, Tori offered. Blackwood, looking less confident now, countered $1,400,000. $1,500,000, Tori responded, her voice steady despite the astronomical figure. Blackwood conferred urgently with his team, their expressions tense. Finally, he shook his head slightly and remained seated. The auctioneer waited the requisite time, then brought down his gavel. Sold to Victoria Montgomery for $1,500,000. A cheer went up from the farmers who had gathered to support Tori. Blackwood and his team gathered their materials and departed quickly, his expression dark with suppressed fury. Outside the courthouse, in the bright morning sunlight, Bob joined Tori as she accepted congratulations from supporters. That was quite a performance in there, she said when they had a moment alone. How did you know Blackwood would back down? I didn't, Bob admitted, but I suspected he had a spending limit from Horizon's board. Corporate types always do. And more importantly, I suspected that once the water system became public knowledge, Horizon would have to recalculate the property's value to their overall plan. Tori laughed, a sound of genuine delight that transformed her usually serious features. Bob Callahan, you are full of surprises. I could say the same about you, Ms. Montgomery, he replied with a smile. So what happens now? Now, Tori's expression turned thoughtful. Now we build something new in this valley, something that honors its past while securing its future. She extended her hand. Partners. Bob took her hand, feeling the warmth and strength in her grip. Partners? The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The closing on the Sullivan property proceeded smoothly, and Tori wasted no time beginning the restoration work. Teams of specialists arrived to assess the irrigation system, soil conditions, and the health of the orchard's trees. Local contractors were hired for the structural repairs to the buildings, providing a welcome boost to the area's economy. Bob found himself dividing his time between his own farm and the Sullivan property, where Tori had established a temporary office in the old farmhouse. Together, they developed plans for the cooperative, refining the partnership agreements and creating implementation schedules for sustainable practices. Word spread quickly through the farming community. More local farmers approached them, curious about the partnership model and increasingly wary of Horizon's aggressive tactics. By the end of the month, 10 farms had formally joined the cooperative, with several others expressing serious interest. The discovery of the historic water system proved even more valuable than they had initially hoped. With careful restoration and modern enhancements, it provided a sustainable water source that helped mitigate the effects of the ongoing drought. Farms that had been struggling to irrigate their crops now had access to a reliable water supply, one that Horizon couldn't control or divert. Blackwood made one final attempt to derail their plans, filing a lawsuit claiming irregularities in the auction process. But with the support of county officials and irrefutable documentation of the water system's existence, the suit was quickly dismissed. Horizon Agricultural was forced to abandon its plans for the dam, Without control of the Sullivan property and with fewer farmers willing to sell, the project was no longer viable. Blackwood was recalled to corporate headquarters, his failure to secure the valley a black mark on his record. By the time spring arrived, bringing with it the promise of a new growing season, the valley had been transformed. The cooperative, now officially named Oak Ridge Heritage Agricultural Partnership, included 15 local farms covering over 3,000 acres. Each remained independently owned but operated under shared principles of sustainability, mutual support, and fair market access. On a warm April morning, Bob stood in his fields, surveying the neat rows of early crops emerging from soil that looked healthier than it had in years. The irrigation system hummed efficiently, delivering precisely measured amounts of water to each section. In the distance, he could see the Sullivan orchard, its trees pruned and ready for the growing season. The buildings restored to their former glory, but now serving a new purpose. The sound of a vehicle approaching drew his attention. Tori's now familiar SUV came up the drive, stopping near where he stood. She stepped out, dressed for fieldwork in jeans and boots, her auburn hair tied back in its practical ponytail. "Good morning," she called as she approached. "Ready for the cooperative meeting this afternoon?" Bob nodded, smiling at her enthusiasm. Over the months of working together, they had developed an easy rapport, their professional partnership deepening into something that felt increasingly personal. "The financial projections are ready, and I've prepared the update on the irrigation improvements," he replied. "Perfect." Tori came to stand beside him, her gaze sweeping over his fields, approval evident in her expression. "The farm is looking good. Bob, your grandfather would be proud." "So would yours," and he returned. Knowing now how much her family connection to the valley meant to her, they stood in companionable silence for a moment, surveying the land they both loved in different but complementary ways. Bob thought about the strange series of events that had brought them to this point, a struggling farmer helping a stranger with a broken fence, unaware that she held the key to saving not just his farm, but an entire way of life. "I never asked you," he said suddenly, a question occurring to him that had somehow never been voiced in all their conversations. "That first day, when I found you after the accident, was that deliberately staged a way to meet me?" Tori laughed, the sound bright in the morning air. "No, that black pickup really did run me off the road. One of Blackwood's more aggressive tactics, though he'd never admit it." She smiled at the memory. "I had planned to introduce myself to you more formally, as a potential investor in the neighboring property. But when the accident happened, and then you appeared, offering help," she shrugged. "Sometimes fate has better ideas than we do." Bob nodded, thinking of all the small decisions, the moments of choice that had led them here, his impulse to help a stranger, Tori's decision to work alongside him, rather than simply accepting his assistance, the shared challenges that had become a shared vision. Each step on its own seemed insignificant, yet together they had changed the course of an entire community. "We should get going," Tori said after a moment. "Lots to do before the meeting." As they walked back to their vehicles, Bob glanced once more at his thriving fields. The drought that had threatened everything he valued had not ended. Water conservation would always be a necessity in this region. The challenges of small-scale farming in a world dominated by corporate agriculture remained, but now they faced those challenges together, not as isolated individuals, but as a community bound by shared purpose and mutual support. A struggling farmer had fixed a stranger's broken fence, unaware she was a landowner seeking someone to trust. And in that simple act of kindness, the foundation had been laid for something larger than either of them had imagined, a model of sustainable partnership that might preserve family farms for generations to come. As Bob climbed into his truck to follow Tori to the Sullivan orchard, now the heart of their cooperative enterprise, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, not just hope for survival, but excitement for the future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, neighbors in the truest sense of the word,